I thought the worst day of my life was behind me, until I walked into that party and saw my wife's betrayal framed and hanging on the wall. There was this low-level dread clinging to me the entire day at work, the kind that tightens your chest and makes it impossible to focus on anything. I couldn't shake it no matter how hard I tried. My mind kept drifting, looping through 100 anxious thoughts. Truth be told, the last thing I wanted to do was go to that party tonight. I'd never been a fan of my wife's office events. They always felt stiff and fake, full of people pretending to be more important than they were. Her colleagues were mostly lawyers and not the humble kind either. The kind that throw around Latin phrases in casual conversation just to show you they can. I always felt like I was being looked down on, like I didn't belong. Still, Olivia insisted I come along to the Christmas party. She said it would be rude not to show up, especially with it being hosted by her firm's senior partner. So, like usual, I sighed and gave in. When Olivia made a request, it never really felt like an option to say no. As the clock finally hit 5, I shut down my computer for the week and stood up, my eyes drifting to a photo sitting on the edge of my desk. It was of my 2 boys taken during that fishing trip we did last summer. Just the 3 of us, laughing, sunburned, and totally in the moment. A quiet smile crept across my face. That memory, that picture, was one of the only things that still felt untouched by the chaos of these past few months. I was still lost in that memory when traffic suddenly started to slow on the highway. There'd been an accident up ahead and it snapped me right back to reality. I realized then that I'd been driving for who knows how long without really noticing anything around me. Just going through the motions. The delay meant I got home about 15 minutes later than usual. Not exactly a big deal to most people, but I already knew what kind of reception was waiting for me. Olivia used to greet me at the door with a smile, sometimes a kiss, but tonight I braced myself for something else entirely. And sure enough, as soon as I stepped inside, there it was. "Oh, look who finally made it home on time, for once," she said, arms crossed, voice sharp as ever. I didn't say anything. No point. I started heading toward the bedroom to change, and from behind me she called out, "Wear the gray pinstripe suit tonight. You know that's my favorite." I paused for a second. That suit? Sure, it was nice. Sharp even. But I'd planned to wear the navy one. It felt more polished, more me. The gray just made me feel like wallpaper in a room full of polished egos. But I already knew I'd end up in the one she wanted. I always did. James Fielding, the man hosting tonight's event, wasn't just some coworker. He was the top dog, the new partner at one of the biggest criminal law firms in Chicago. And every year, he threw these elaborate holiday parties at his estate on the north side. Olivia had been jittery all week about it, more on edge than usual. By the time we got there, I could tell she was barely holding it together. Her words were spilling out faster than usual, and her eyes kept darting around like she was waiting for something, or someone. When we reached the massive doors to the entertainment wing, Olivia suddenly grabbed my arm and pulled me off to the side, pressing me up against the wall and hugging me with this urgent, almost desperate energy. "Olivia?" I whispered, confused. "What's going on? Are you all right?" She didn't let go. Just tightened her grip. "No, it's nothing," she said quickly. I needed to tell you something." She pulled back slightly and looked me dead in the eyes. "Dusty, I love you. I've always loved you. And I need you to hold on to that, okay? Whatever happens tonight, it won't change that. It doesn't change anything between us. We're still us. You hear me?" I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "What do you mean, whatever happens tonight?" But she didn't answer. She just gave me one last squeeze, then stepped back and took a deep breath like she was preparing for battle. "I just need you to keep one thing in mind tonight," Olivia whispered, her voice low but trembling slightly. "We're doing okay, you and me. I know these parties make your skin crawl, and yeah, I get it, you've never liked the crowd I work with. But if you can just hold on to the fact that what we have doesn't change, none of this stuff will matter." Dusty gave her a puzzled look. "I really don't know what you're talking about," he said quietly. "You're right though, I don't fit in here. These lawyers with their smug smiles and their self-importance. It's not my world, never has been. But that's nothing new. I'll manage just like I always do." He sighed and added, "As long as we're good, that's all I need." Olivia nodded and gave him one last tight squeeze before letting go. Then, without another word, she took his hand and let him guide her into the sprawling room. James Fielding, the man of the hour, was standing next to a sleek, oversized bar. The whole setup looked like it had been lifted straight from a luxury magazine. Behind him hung a bold painting, a nude woman stretched across a velvet bed. The lighting made the gold frame glow, drawing the eyes of anyone walking past. Dusty peeled off to grab drinks, a glass of white wine for Olivia, neat whiskey for himself. As he passed Fielding, they shared a stiff nod. But then Fielding narrowed his eyes, casting Dusty a glance that felt more like a silent threat than a greeting. Something about that look made Dusty's skin crawl, and he found himself wondering if his distaste for Fielding wasn't just mutual, it was personal. He brought the drinks back and handed Olivia hers, placing himself instinctively between her and Fielding's circle. His back leaned casually against the bar as he stood guard. Olivia stepped forward and greeted Fielding with a brief kiss on the cheek, something that might have looked innocent to a stranger, but to Dusty, it stung more than it should have. She then drifted into conversation with the group, laughing lightly, nodding along. Dusty stayed out of it, hovering close but silent. He glanced around the room, letting his eyes land once more on the painting. His stomach turned. That's when it happened. A hush fell over Dusty's senses, like the room had slowed to a crawl. There was a man nearby watching him with a strange grin, something between pity and amusement. Dusty's chest tightened. His throat felt dry. Then, like someone else had taken over his voice, he leaned slightly toward Olivia and said under his breath, "It's you." The words came out soft, but to him they echoed like a bomb going off. The room froze. Every sound seemed to die at once, like the whole space was holding its breath. Dusty's eyes were still locked on the painting. Olivia turned to him, eyes wide. "No," she whispered quickly, shaking her head. "That woman, she has black hair. That's not me." But her voice was barely holding steady. Around them, people exchanged quiet, pointed glances, looking at the painting, then at Olivia. The resemblance wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. It was enough to spark suspicion. Enough to make Dusty's heart drop. Then Fielding's voice sliced through the silence. "Let me make something real clear," he said, stepping closer with an expression that made Dusty's fists clench. "You're nothing. And that's not going to change. Your wife." He paused, smirking. "She's mine now. Maybe she plays the loyal partner at home, but when I'm in the picture, she's exactly where she wants to be." His words were quiet but sharp, venom-laced, and meant for Dusty alone. Dusty's heart pounded in his ears. The party went on around them, but the room felt like it had shifted under his feet. Fielding didn't stop there. He leaned in slightly, keeping his voice low but with that same smug tone. "If you try to fight this, the firm's going to side with Olivia. They always protect their own, and you'll walk away with nothing. Meanwhile, I'll keep enjoying everything she gives me." I stared at him, my brain scrambling to make sense of what I was hearing. My eyes shifted from his face to Olivia's. I wanted her to say something, to deny it, to tell me this was some awful misunderstanding. But she didn't. Instead, she looked right at me and said the words that would rattle around in my head for a long time. "It's been going on for a while, Dusty." That admission, it hit me like a punch in the gut. My breath caught. Everything around me, the music, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, suddenly felt distant and hollow. I could hardly move, let alone speak. Then, without waiting for a response, Olivia turned and walked out of the room, and just like that, out of the house. Behind her, laughter rang out again, cruel and careless. I stood frozen, trying to hold myself together, but the tears were there, threatening to break free. I blinked fast, forcing them back. I wasn't going to give Fielding the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart in front of him. Fielding turned to the others with a grin and let out a smug laugh. "Did you see his face when he figured out the painting was recent?" I told her he'd recognize it. Olivia had told him everything. Every detail. And now it was entertainment. She later told me she felt like she owed me an apology, but then just as quickly she brushed it off, saying she only did what she did because I had accused her of cheating in the past. She said it was revenge. A way to teach me a lesson. I guess I never thought I'd see her like that. Fielding watched her leave after me, looking like he already knew she'd come back. She was stunning, long dark hair, graceful, with that figure that used to turn heads when we walked into a room together. I often wondered how a guy like me ended up with someone like her. At 5 feet 10 inches and over 370 pounds, I wasn't exactly the image of the bold, powerful man her colleagues all seemed to be. I was quiet, methodical, more comfortable with spreadsheets than socializing. I was the textbook definition of an accountant, and I lived up to it. About a year ago, I learned that her new supervisor was none other than James Fielding. Young, tall, attractive, charming, the complete opposite of me. I started noticing the changes not long after she began working under him. Olivia still stayed late at the office just like she had with her previous boss, but the frequency started ticking up. Then came the attitude shifts, little comments, sharper glances. Her wardrobe changed. Her tone changed. And her eyes, they didn't hold the same warmth anymore. She became distant. More energetic with everyone else but cold with me. And now I knew why. That night, after a few too many glasses of single malt, I sank into the old leather armchair and let myself drift off while It's a Wonderful Life played in the background. The irony didn't escape me. Sometime around 1:45 a.m., Olivia gently woke me up. "Come on, Dusty," she said softly, nudging me. "Come to bed." I followed her in a fog, still unsure how to process any of this. Lying beside her in the dim bedroom, I looked at her and said quietly, "I didn't expect any of this, Olivia. But one thing's for sure. I don't want the boys stumbling across that painting." She blushed just faintly and turned her head, ashamed. "I didn't mean for it to get like this," she mumbled. "It's not revenge," I said, my voice flat. "It's humiliation." She looked like she was about to respond, but then her eyes dropped to the blanket between us. She said nothing. "So that's what it is now?" I asked, barely above a whisper. "You've traded in what we built, for someone new. Someone younger. More exciting." Her silence was louder than any answer she could have given. "All those years we spent building this life, all the moments, the memories, they don't mean anything to you now?" She glanced at me then, finally meeting my eyes. There was something there, regret maybe, or guilt, but I wasn't sure anymore if I could trust what I saw in her. "I still care about you, Dusty," she said almost inaudibly. "But caring and loving, they're not the same, are they?" "I just don't feel the same way anymore," Olivia said, her voice cold but controlled. "James and I, we have this connection, Dusty. It's deeper in some ways, different. It's new and it's exciting." Those words cut straight through me. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. "Exciting?" I repeated, the bitterness in my voice barely hidden. "And what does that make this, what we had? Boring?" She didn't answer that. She just shook her head slightly as if I wasn't getting the point. "And what about the boys?" I asked, trying to ground her in something, anything. "You think they won't be affected by this? Our family isn't just a name on paper, Olivia." She raised her eyebrows and scoffed. "The boys? Come on, Dusty. They've moved out. They're living their lives. This doesn't concern them." I stared at her, stunned at how lightly she was taking this. "You honestly think this isn't going to shatter them?" I asked. "You really think they won't care that their parents' marriage is over because their mom fell for her boss?" She crossed her arms and gave a tired sigh. "You're not going to split up this family. You don't want people knowing you got cheated on. And I know you still care about me, so just give me a little time and we'll get back to how it was. You'll see. Just you and me again." I stared at her like I didn't recognize the woman in front of me. "All these years," I said slowly, "I thought you loved me. I thought I could trust you with everything. And now, I have to sleep in a house where you let another man hang a picture of you naked above his bar." Her face flushed, but she didn't deny it. "And what makes you think I'll ever be okay with this? That I'll forgive this?" She didn't answer. She just turned away. The next morning I called both of our sons. I had to tell them. They deserved to hear it from me. "Are you sure, Dad?" Robbie, my oldest, asked, his voice shaken. "I mean, this doesn't sound like Mom at all." "I'm sure, son," I said. "James Fielding isn't just her boss. They've been together for a while. He even took a photo of her after they—" I couldn't bring myself to finish the sentence. "He hung it in his private bar, Robbie. Your mom posed for him and he made sure everyone around him saw it." Robbie went silent. Then I heard his boyfriend, Will, say in the background, "That's the same woman we saw in that picture at the holiday event, isn't it?" "What are you talking about?" Robbie asked. "There was a photo," Will said slowly, realization dawning. "I remember because I said she was stunning." And then Jerry read the nameplate out loud. "Tracy Dustman. That's your mom's name, right?" Robbie didn't respond for a long time. Then finally, "Oh my God." Turns out, the affair had been an open secret at the law firm for months. Maybe longer. Olivia and Fielding hadn't even bothered to hide it anymore. People gossiped about it like it was some twisted office joke, some scandalous romance unfolding right under everyone's noses. And me? I was the fool, the last one to know. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized. We split the assets down the middle. The house was sold. Olivia moved in with Fielding. I found a small apartment not far from my job, close enough to walk to work. Fielding, of course, kept playing the role of the smug victor. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that he'd hung that photo front and center in his bar at home. He poured himself a glass of single malt one night, grinning at it, remembering every time Olivia posed for him like that, satisfied, completely his. She didn't resist the change. Not once. Her salary stayed the same, her benefits untouched. Her new boss, some cocky Georgetown law grad in his early 30s, had that confident air about him, just like Fielding. It took him all of 2 weeks to kiss her. And 6 weeks later she was in bed with him too. At 52 she was still stunning, still charming. She turned heads. And when one of Robbie's friends saw the photo again at another firm event, he exclaimed without thinking, "Wow, look at this woman. This is amazing." That's when Jerry, another guest, read the nameplate aloud. Tracy Dustman. Artist, Emile Gfer. The room fell silent. Willie turned to Robbie. "Wait, she has the same name as your..." And that's when the truth hit him, full force. They all realized at once, it wasn't just a passing affair. It was a spectacle. A joke. An insult with a frame around it. "Your mom and her lover," someone at the firm later told me, "thought it was hilarious how you found out, how long it took. They found it funny." Funny. That was the moment it really sank in. Not just the betrayal, but the cruelty of it. The way they laughed at my pain. "I have no idea how that painting ended up here," Mike whispered, leaning toward his father with urgency in his voice. "Dad, you've got to talk to someone. Ask them to take it down." "That's Mom." Dusty let out a quiet breath, his eyes fixed on the image hanging near the reception hall's back corner. "Yeah. I know," he said, keeping his tone steady. "I'll speak to the manager, but it's kind of ironic, isn't it? You didn't seem all that bothered by what she did back when I first told you." Mike's expression tightened. "I didn't believe it then," he admitted. "I couldn't. I guess part of me didn't want to." The words hung in the air like dust floating through sunlight. Moments before the wedding ceremony, Mike, his son, now a grown man and a groom, had finally understood just how complicated things had been. That strange painting Olivia had once posed for, the one she never imagined would resurface in such a public and painful way, was now hanging where their entire extended family could see it. Dusty hadn't planned to bring it up today of all days, but it was impossible to ignore. As the music began and the ceremony neared, Dusty made his way to the pews. Olivia, already seated a few feet away, caught his eye. He leaned slightly in her direction and muttered, just loud enough for her to hear, "Did you hear? That guy sold the painting." Her cheeks flushed bright red. "I only found out last night," she whispered back, barely meeting his gaze. It had been 5 years since their divorce. 5 long, quiet years. They hadn't spoken much during that time, just the necessary calls about the boys or paperwork that needed signing. Dusty had grown closer to his sons. Olivia had drifted further from them, almost unintentionally, like a balloon slipping out of reach. Back at the reception, seated with relatives at a long, decorated table, Olivia stole glances at her ex-husband. Something about him had changed, but not in the way she expected. Time had been kind to him. A few more wrinkles around his eyes, a hint of gray at his temples, but the rest? Still Dusty. Those sharp blue eyes, the strong jawline that used to make her stomach flip when they first met. He carried himself with a quiet confidence now. He looked good. And Dusty? He saw her watching him. And despite everything, despite the betrayal, the pain, the years that followed, part of him still felt something. That tug in the chest that reminded him he'd once loved her deeply. In some small, stubborn way he probably still did. But he also knew one thing with absolute clarity. He could never trust her again. After their divorce, Dusty avoided dating for over a year. He just wasn't ready. Some women at work had shown interest. They'd heard he was single, but he kept his distance. He wasn't bitter. Just guarded. He'd learned the hard way that love without trust was a slow kind of torture. In time he did begin to date again. And to his surprise, the dating pool was full of women in his age group. Many divorced, many still hopeful. Statistically, men his age were in shorter supply, and that worked in his favor. But trust, that still took effort. Later that evening, the music shifted to a slower tempo. Couples began swaying together on the dance floor. Dusty stood near the edge, sipping a glass of wine. He wasn't much of a dancer, but he watched them, smiling at the joy on his son's face. It was then he met Kristen. She was seated at the bride's family table, but her eyes had met his more than once. During a slow song, she walked over, offering a small, sincere smile. "Mind if I sit for a minute?" she asked. "Please," he said, motioning to the seat beside him. They talked. Naturally. Effortlessly. Kristen was 52, a high school teacher who lived about an hour outside of Chicago. Divorced nearly 20 years, she had raised her children alone and built a quiet, strong life for herself. As Dusty listened, he found himself thinking, not for the first time, that maybe fate has its own way of working things out. "You've been single all this time?" he asked. She laughed gently, brushing her hair behind one ear. It's not like I planned it. I just never really met someone I wanted to start over with. You know. I do, Dusty said. And he meant it. Later that night, while standing off to the side again, Dusty watched Kristen talking with another guest. He couldn't help but wonder where this might lead. It was the first time in years he felt something clean. No lies. No deception. Just interest and maybe the start of something simple and good. And just as he was about to walk over and say something more, a man wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses brushed past him. Dusty turned instinctively. And before James Fielding could react, Dusty was already staring him down, heart racing. Everything old was starting to resurface. The moment Dusty heard the low crackle of electricity, it was too late. A sharp, searing pain ripped through his groin, and he crumpled to the ground, gasping. The taser had hit its mark. Before he could gather his bearings, a swift kick slammed into his nose, cartilage cracked and warm blood rushed down his face. A second blow followed, this time to his jaw. His head snapped back and his vision blurred. Staggered, barely clinging to consciousness, Dusty barely registered the third hit before it landed, right across his cheek, splitting the skin and sending stars across his vision. Then, as he tried to roll away, the attacker stood over him, raised a knee, and drove it straight into his ribs. A sickening crack followed, and Dusty let out a guttural cry as pain shot like fire through his chest. His body collapsed into itself and everything went numb. For a brief moment, there was only darkness. Then, like film playing in reverse, memories began to surface, unrelated yet hauntingly clear. Maybe it was the pain or the vulnerability, but his mind drifted to someone he hadn't thought about in years. Gil. Born John Thomas Edwards, but no one called him that, not since high school. His dad had some pull around town, and before long, everyone just called him Gil. Gil Chastain. That was the name he chose, and it stuck. Gil's background was complicated. His father, a wine merchant from Bordeaux with old-world sensibilities, married a Philadelphia socialite who never quite adjusted to life in Wichita. They lived in a mansion in College Hill, all manicured lawns and imported furniture. My family, on the other hand, was about as far from that world as you could get. We lived just outside Pleasant Valley in a creaky farmhouse on the edge of the Big Ditch, north of 37th Street. Money was tight, but we made it work. And in that small-town way, I learned to carry myself with pride, even if my shoes were scuffed and my jacket secondhand. I was the linebacker on our high school football team. On the basketball court, I ran point. Gil, tall and confident, played forward, but had the finesse of a defensive ace. We were an unlikely duo, but together we earned back-to-back state championships during our sophomore and junior years. Back then I was dating Patty from Southeastern. She was the kind of girl every guy noticed, the one that seemed untouchable. I was lucky to have her. And long before Gil and I would drift apart, he used to say, "Dusty, you're punching way above your weight with her." He wasn't wrong. But things with Gil started to change. It began subtly. A cold shoulder here, a bitter comment there. We'd spar on the field, sometimes physically. One afternoon after practice, things boiled over. Words became fists. He dodged one of mine and landed a hard left hook right under my chin. I hit the dirt hard. He didn't help me up. Just turned and walked away like I didn't matter. I showed up at his house 20 minutes later, still reeling, looking for an explanation, maybe even an apology. He gave me neither. Our friendship became a strange back and forth after that, brotherhood one day, open rivalry the next. It finally ended during a homecoming game the next fall. He'd become a local star with Division I scouts showing up just to watch him play. Oklahoma was circling and he loved every second of it. I ended up staying closer to home, taking a scholarship at the University of Wichita, majoring in accounting and running with the Reserve Officers Corps. Life moved on. But now, lying there on the cold pavement, bleeding and bruised, that memory felt like a warning. A reminder of the pain that comes when trust is broken. When someone who once stood beside you decides to take you down instead. Dusty stirred, the world around him spinning. The attacker had vanished. The street was quiet again. Somewhere deep in his mind, Dusty heard a voice from the past. Maybe Gil's. Maybe his own. "You've taken your hits. Now get up." After high school, I was accepted into the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis. It was a big moment for me, but it also marked the beginning of a slow drift between our families. We stopped visiting each other, stopped getting together for holidays or birthdays. I guess that's just how it goes when life starts pulling people in different directions. Once I graduated from university, I chose to serve in the Marine Corps. I was granted a month's leave before my first deployment to Vietnam. During that brief window, I reconnected with Ruby, a girl I had dated on and off through the years. We weren't anything official, but there'd always been something there. An understanding, maybe? We went to a dance together at the Moose Lodge on East Kel that week. The energy of the room, the music, the way she smiled when I offered my hand, it felt like something out of another life. Back then, everyone was bracing for the reality of deployment. We didn't talk much about war, but it was always lingering between the lines. Our time together wasn't frequent, but it was deep. Honest. By the time I boarded the plane, Ruby and I had gotten engaged. Originally, I expected to land right in the thick of combat. But orders changed last minute. Instead of the front lines, I was sent to the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California, to study Vietnamese. It was a strange twist of fate, but I took it. Ruby joined me not long after. We decided to escape the constant looming uncertainty and drove up to Reno, where we got married in a small, quiet ceremony. No fuss. Just us. Ruby found a small place just outside the base in the Carmel area. Her father, a senior figure at Boeing, helped her get settled. I knew how different this life was from the one we were heading into, but for a few fleeting weeks, we pretended everything was going to stay simple. Soon enough, I was shipped overseas, assigned to Quang Tri Province just miles south of the demilitarized zone. It was nothing like anything I had known before. Isolated, rural, and haunted by the constant tension of being deep in a combat zone. The region had become a strategic battleground, a patchwork of Marine and Vietnamese bases fighting to maintain control of key roads and settlements along the coast. Mom once told me Chaz, that Chaz, had ended up with the 53rd Airborne Brigade somewhere in the Central Highlands. She didn't know about the growing hostility between us. She thought we were still childhood friends. But things had changed a long time ago, and I never had the heart to explain. The base I was stationed at was heavily fortified, lined with machine gun nests, anti-tank weaponry, and rows of buried claymore mines. The only source of fresh water came from a stream tucked along the northern edge of the base. We'd haul water uphill to fill thick rubber bladders, storing just enough to get through each day. I was assigned to the S2 Battalion, working directly under an intelligence major. My job was to translate documents recovered from captured or fallen enemy soldiers. We had to work fast, sometimes painfully fast. The information we gathered often meant the difference between life and death for nearby units. There were days I barely slept, hunched over pages stained with dirt and blood, trying to extract meaning from fragments. At one point, I was sent to Tan Son Nhut Air Base near Saigon for a short-term intelligence coordination mission. A few of us from the language division were brought in to streamline our translation processes and spot patterns in enemy communications. The hope was to improve not just the quality of the work, but our ability to ask the right questions, questions that could save American lives. But before I could implement what we learned, the war had other plans. On the morning of my return flight, I boarded a chopper under a hot, unforgiving sky, never knowing how drastically things were about to change. The helicopter touched down just as the first mortar round exploded in the LZ. The earth shook beneath us and the sharp whistle of incoming shells filled the air. I hit the ground running, heart pounding, boots slamming against the dirt, trying to find cover before the next impact. Then I felt it. A searing jolt of pain tore through my side. Everything slowed. The sounds faded into a dull hum. I collapsed, face first into the dust, gasping as fire licked through my ribs and legs. What happened next was a blur. The chaos around me faded into a spinning darkness. When I came to, I was on a stretcher, barely able to breathe. The pain was unbearable, far beyond anything I'd felt in training or combat drills. I remember seeing flashes of movement around me, medics shouting, blood pooling on the canvas beneath my back. They said I nearly died that day. Somehow the med team pulled me through. But survival didn't feel like victory. The emotional toll was brutal. I cried, openly without shame, for 2 days straight. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back there. Broken. Helpless. It took every ounce of strength I had to build some kind of mask to function again. I woke up later in a hospital bed in Hawaii, stitched together but hollow. Ruby came to visit, but only briefly. 30 minutes tops. Day after day the same short appearance, never more, never less. When I finally worked up the courage to ask why she didn't stay longer, she just shrugged and said, "This place is too depressing. I can't stand the smell." Her words stung more than the wound in my side. Over time things started to fall apart. Ruby was restless. She'd pace around the apartment like a bird in a cage, and whenever she left, she was dressed like she was heading to some gala. Perfume too expensive for our budget. Heels I'd never seen before. Low-cut tops, sleek dresses. At first I told myself not to overthink it. But the effort she put into her appearance, and the vague explanations about where she was going spoke volumes. "Just meeting up with the girls," she'd say. But her smile never quite reached her eyes. I started spiraling. There were moments when I seriously considered doing something drastic. But I had no plan, just a heavy dragging sense of despair that followed me from room to room. Then out of nowhere an old face from the past showed up. He walked back into my life like no time had passed. Still cocky. Still magnetic. But changed. He'd lost an eye during a surprise assault by the Viet Cong, and now wore a dark eye patch. Strangely, it made him look more distinguished. Rugged. Like some kind of war-scarred hero. The first time he appeared, I was dozing off in a haze of painkillers. The doorbell rang and Ruby opened it. I heard her voice first, then his. "Chaz?" she asked, clearly surprised. "What are you doing here?" Then I heard his voice, smug, smooth. "Just checking in. And you? Well, you're looking great, Ruby." I forced myself to sit up, my joints screaming in protest. "What the hell are you doing here?" I asked, my voice rasping out from dry lips. Chaz stepped into view, dressed in a crisp sports jacket, his signature smirk planted across his face. He looked like he hadn't aged a day. "Easy, Bill," he said, using my middle name like only he ever did. "You look like hell. But a good kind of hell." I stared at him, confused, suspicious, and oddly uneasy. Ruby stood in the background, quiet, brushing non-existent dust off her dress. I didn't know it then, but something had shifted in the room. Something I wouldn't fully understand until later. I sat at the edge of the bed, the lamp casting a dim amber glow across the room. Everything I needed was laid out neatly beside me, just as I'd planned. Slowly, I reached for the box of cartridges. One by one, I wiped each bullet with the corner of the sheet, polishing the brass until it gleamed in the soft light. It became a kind of ritual, calming, even, something to focus on while my thoughts churned beneath the surface. 10 minutes must have passed. Maybe more. My hands moved methodically, almost detached from my mind. Then, without warning, a single tear slipped down my cheek and landed square on a .38 cartridge. I stared at it for a moment, watching how the moisture distorted the light. After that, I slid each round into the chamber, click, 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 until the revolver was full. I checked the barrel, out of habit, even though it hardly mattered at this point. Then I stood, heading toward the kitchen. I needed something to settle my nerves. To me that meant one thing, a pour of Kentucky bourbon. Just a small glass. Enough to numb the edge without clouding my clarity. My hands trembled as I poured, and I leaned against the counter, pressing my palms into my face, breathing deep. The weight of what I was considering pressed against my chest like a stone. I returned to the bedroom with the drink in one hand and the weapon in the other. The chords came next. I'd thought it through in quiet moments over the past few days, measured, cut, split. I'd prepared them with the same focus I used to apply to my work. Everything had to be exact. Simple. Flawless. I took out my phone and held it at arm's length. The screen glowed cold against the dark room. This was the moment, the one I'd been circling around for weeks. Then around 11 o'clock I heard it. The low hum of an approaching car. Tires on gravel. The front gate creaked. I stood motionless in the hallway just outside the bedroom, listening. The door swung open with a hollow clunk. And there they were. Ruby and Chaz. Her hair was tousled. Lipstick smeared. Her blouse half-tucked, wrinkled, disheveled. They froze in the doorway like they'd stepped into the wrong scene of a play. But it was exactly the one I'd rehearsed. I took a few silent steps back and positioned myself just out of view, calm, alert. There was a strange stillness in my chest. Not rage. Not even sorrow. Just a deep, unfamiliar peace. Like I was floating above everything, watching it unfold. And then came the sirens. Distant at first, then closer. Fast. Tires screeched outside. Doors slammed. Heavy boots hit the pavement with purpose. Someone had called it in. Maybe a neighbor, maybe someone who had caught wind of what I'd been planning. And then a scream. One sharp, broken cry from inside the house, followed by pounding footsteps on the front porch. I didn't move. Not at first. Through it all, I kept thinking, not about Ruby, not even about Chaz, but about the boys. About what they'd wake up to tomorrow. About how close I came to becoming something I'd never want them to remember me by. The footsteps stopped at the door. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't the end. It was just the edge of something I still had to survive.